At 1900 hours on September 15th, 2025, the Caribbean night was deceptively calm. From high altitude, Lieutenant Sarah Collins stared into her infrared display at Homestead Air Force Base. On her screen, a single streak cut north across the dark sea, running at 45 knots. No radio call, no transponder, just raw speed. Colonel James Whitaker leaned over her shoulder, silent but intent. He didn't need convincing. Fishing boats don't move like that. Freight carriers don't burn 4 mercury outboards. Only Cartel go-fasts run those waters with such arrogance. 200 miles off Florida Keys, the target looked small, barely 35 feet, but every operator in the room knew what it carried. Wrapped under tarps were millions of dollars in narcotics bound for American shores. On board, Miguel, Shark, Alvarez and his crew thought the path was clear. They had paid off the right people, followed the same route as before, and trusted their GPS. What they didn't know was that their boat had been locked in crosshairs since 1700 hours. The strike authorization was already signed. Only one final confirmation remained. In less than 10 minutes, everything would change. The order came down in a voice flat and steady, the kind that carried no emotion. Target confirmed. Execute strike package. In the command center, Collins exhaled sharply, her fingers tightening on the joystick that controlled the electro-optical pod. On her display, the go-fast was now crystal clear. 4 outboards churned white foam into the dark sea, silhouettes of men shifting nervously along the deck. She tagged the vessel with a laser designator, the symbol flashing red across her interface. Somewhere above the Caribbean, an armed drone responded silently. Colonel Whitaker said nothing. He didn't have to. The authorization had already been signed hours earlier. His job now was to ensure no hesitation. Hesitation was lethal. 200 miles away, Miguel Shark Alvarez sensed nothing. He kept nodding to his GPS, convinced the coordinates guaranteed safe passage. Beside him, Carlos Mendez adjusted a rifle under his jacket, muttering that the sea was too quiet. Rafael Torres tried to distract himself by watching the compass, whispering a prayer. At 1906, the night sky briefly split open. From altitude, the drone released a precision-guided munition. The descent was invisible, no roar, no trail, just a pinpoint of kinetic certainty. Collins watched her screen flare white-hot. A bloom of fire expanded outward, consuming the skiff in seconds. In the command center, no one cheered. Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of machines. 3 men would not see another sunrise. The strike was surgical, but its implications were anything but simple. On the surface of the Caribbean, wreckage burned quietly, scattered across the waves. From Washington's perspective, it was another successful interdiction. To others, it was the beginning of a dangerous precedent. And already, chatter in intelligence channels hinted that this would not be the last. By dawn, fragments of scorched fiberglass drifted toward the Florida Straits. The sea had already begun to erase the evidence. For Washington, however, the narrative was sharpened overnight. At a press briefing, officials used deliberate phrasing. A kinetic strike on a narco-terrorist vessel in international waters. No mention of names, no cargo samples, no serial numbers, just a flash on the horizon framed as homeland defense. Colonel Whitaker listened to the broadcast from his office at Homestead. The language was exactly as scripted. Clean, decisive, and unyielding. Yet he felt the unease simmering among his officers. Collins in particular had grown quiet. She knew what the footage didn't show: the silhouettes of men pacing nervously before the bloom of fire consumed them. In Miami, Ethan Ward lit a cigarette on his apartment balcony, watching the morning headlines unfold. His phone buzzed with a coded message. Payment confirmed. He had delivered intelligence that helped make the strike possible. But he also knew his double game was becoming riskier. If either side suspected betrayal, his body might end up floating in the same waters he had betrayed. For now, he exhaled smoke and whispered, 2 down. 1 more to go. September 17th brought storm clouds over Washington, both literal and political. Senator Mark Donovan stood before a line of microphones on Capitol Hill, demanding answers. The Constitution is clear, he declared, his voice echoing in the rotunda. Only Congress holds the power to authorize military action. Yet we now see lethal strikes executed at the president's discretion with no mandate, no oversight, and no accountability. His words struck like artillery fire into the administration's carefully crafted narrative. Inside the Pentagon, staffers scrambled. Talking points were circulated. These were not acts of war, but defensive operations in the global commons. Still, unease lingered among uniformed officers. Some whispered that each destroyed vessel carried not only narcotics, but also intelligence radios, sat phones, even maps of smuggling routes lost forever in fire and seawater. At Homestead, Collins reviewed the infrared footage once more. The moment before detonation haunted her, the shadows of men shifting, unaware of their fate. She pressed her eyes shut, forcing the image away, but the silence in the command center after the strike returned again and again. Meanwhile in Miami, Ethan Ward poured whiskey over ice and dialed a secure line. "Your next shipment's exposed," he muttered in Spanish. On the other end, a voice replied coldly, "And so are you, Ward. Choose wisely who you're working for." The line went dead, leaving Ward staring at his glass, the weight of betrayal pressing heavier than the alcohol. The storm was only beginning. By September 18th, the Caribbean air was heavy with tension. Intelligence reports circulated that another go-fast was preparing to launch from the Venezuelan coast. Colonel Whitaker received the briefing inside Homestead's operations center. The lights dimmed, the air still. "Third vessel, same route," an analyst confirmed. The words tightened the room like a noose. Collins sat nearby, her eyes fixed on the satellite imagery. The boat was not yet at sea, but the patterns were familiar. Outboards lined along a dock, tarps stretched over suspiciously uniform cargo. She leaned closer, whispering, "They're repeating the play." Whitaker nodded, but his expression hardened. Repetition meant predictability, and predictability meant vulnerability. In Miami, Ward was restless. Cartel contacts had grown suspicious after the September 15th strike, and whispers of a mole spread like wildfire. He felt the walls closing in. As he drove through Little Havana, he caught glimpses of unfamiliar cars in his mirror, headlights lingering too long. He gripped the wheel tighter, the cigarette in his mouth trembling with each drag. On Capitol Hill, Senator Donovan escalated his assault, calling for emergency hearings. "This is not defense," he thundered. "This is undeclared war." His words ricocheted through evening broadcasts, stirring public debate. Between Florida's coast, Washington's halls, and the cartel docks in Venezuela, the threads of escalation tightened. Another strike loomed, but this time, both sides were watching for betrayal. The battlefield was no longer just at sea, it was inside living rooms, war rooms, and back alleys alike. Night fell heavy on September 19th. The Venezuelan boat had slipped from its dock, engines roaring low across black water. From her console at Homestead, Collins tracked it with a fresh sense of unease. The signature was unmistakable. Another go fast. Same design, same speed. But something felt wrong. The vessel wasn't alone. A second heat trace lingered several hundred meters behind, shadowing it. "Escort?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. Colonel Whitaker stepped closer. "Or bait?" he muttered. Cartels had learned quickly. They knew Washington was watching. If the first skiff was decoy, then the real cargo might already be heading north under a different flag. Meanwhile in Miami, Ward's paranoia peaked. He spotted two men loitering across from his apartment, their posture military, their eyes too sharp. He ducked inside, locked the door, and dialed his encrypted line again. No answer. Sweat dripped down his temples as the silence stretched. The double life was collapsing around him. In Washington, Donovan pressed harder, urging Congress to suspend all kinetic strikes until hearings concluded. Cameras captured his fiery speech, his words echoing, "If we call smugglers terrorists, what line won't we cross next?" Public support began to split, protests brewing outside the Capitol. Back at sea, Collins watched as the escort boat suddenly veered west. The main skiff kept north. On her display, the target split like forked lightning. Whitaker gave a hard look. "One's a decoy, the other's real. Find out which before we fire." The pressure in the operations center thickened. This time, the decision wasn't clear, and hesitation could be deadlier than action. The ocean was a chessboard, and every move carried weight. Collins stared at the split tracks, her cursor flicking between the two heat signatures. The northern skiff powered on at reckless speed, outboard screaming. The western boat moved slower, steadier, as if daring surveillance to follow. "Which one do we take?" Collins asked, her voice tight. Whitaker's reply was measured. "Intelligence says the real cargo heads north, but intelligence has been wrong before." He didn't mention Ethan Ward by name, but the thought hung heavy. If Ward's feeds were compromised, they might be staring at a trap. At that very moment, Ward sat in his apartment, phone vibrating on the table. The cartel finally called back. A low voice slid through the line. "We know you sold us. The third shipment moves tonight. Choose your side, Ward." The call ended with silence more menacing than words. Ward grabbed his pistol from a drawer, pacing the room like a caged animal. Back at Homestead, pressure peaked. Collins toggled her pod onto the northern boat, zooming in. Through the haze of infrared, she caught the faint outline of crates stacked beneath tarps, larger than the previous strike. Her pulse quickened. "Colonel, I've got confirmation cargo looks heavier. Could be bulk shipment." Whitaker studied the display, then gave the order with iron certainty. "Prepare strike package. North skiff only." The room stilled, every officer waiting. In the silent seconds before launch, Collins thought of the silhouettes again. Men who had no idea the sky was about to fall. At 19:30 hours, the decision was sealed. The drone banked eastward, aligning its vector with the northern skiff. Collins steadied her breath, her finger hovering over the command input. The screen pulsed with a red lock. On the water, Miguel "Shark" Alvarez felt the sea churn beneath him. He laughed nervously, telling his crew they were untouchable. But Rafael Torres kept glancing upward, sensing a weight in the sky. Carlos Mendez tightened his grip on the rifle, muttering that silence always meant danger. At Homestead, Whitaker gave the nod. "Send it." Collins pressed. The drone released its payload, a guided missile cutting invisible through the humid night. Seconds later, the screen bloomed white, then orangey, an expanding fireball where the skiff had been. The command center went still again, but this silence was different. The second strike in 2 weeks confirmed the pattern. It was no longer an operation. It was a campaign. In Miami, Ward watched the televised flash, face pale in the glow. His phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. "You can't play both sides forever." For the first time, Ward realized survival would require more than secrets. It would demand choosing a war. The morning after the strike, Washington woke to divided headlines. On one channel, anchors praised decisive action, flashing bold graphics. U.S. neutralizes narco-terrorist threat. On another, critics asked the harder question: was this legal? Capitol Hill buzzed with tension as Senator Donovan pushed for emergency hearings. His warning thundered through the chambers. When smugglers become terrorists by decree, we erode the very foundation of our democracy. See what? Inside the Pentagon, officers whispered uneasily. Some saw the strikes as tactical brilliance, low risk, high impact. Others feared the cost of lost intelligence. Radios, maps, even cartel phones all vaporized before they could be exploited. The war was being fought in fire, not in information. At Homestead, Collins sat quietly at her station, replaying the footage once more. The silhouettes haunted her like ghosts, pacing across the deck seconds before annihilation. She wondered if she was staring at smugglers, or simply men trying to survive in a war they never chose. Meanwhile, in Miami, Ward felt the net closing. He spotted a new face in his building lobby, muscular, calm, watching him too closely. His phone buzzed again, another message from the cartel. "Your time is almost up." Ward poured another glass of whiskey, the weight of his pistol heavy at his side. Beyond the headlines and politics, one truth was clear. This wasn't just interdiction. It wasn't even just counter-narcotics. It was escalation step by step, strike by strike, into a campaign that no one had formally declared but everyone was now living inside. By September 20th, the storm broke. Protests swelled outside the Capitol, banners reading, "No war without Congress," flapping in humid winds. Inside, emergency hearings began, cameras capturing Donovan's relentless assault on the administration's unchecked authority. For the first time, whispers of impeachment drifted through the marble halls. At Homestead, Whitaker faced his own storm. Intelligence now suggested the Western vessel, the one they had dismissed, might have been the true carrier. Satellite shots revealed it had slipped into Cuban waters, its cargo unloaded under the cover of night. The realization hit like a missile. The northern strike had destroyed a decoy. Billions in narcotics were already moving through hidden routes. Collins felt the weight of it crush her chest. Her precision, her certainty, it had been wrong. She replayed the footage again and again. The silhouettes of men she had killed while the real prize vanished elsewhere. Her hands shook, the word decoy burning into her thoughts. In Miami, Ward's double game ended abruptly. The stranger from the lobby waited in his apartment, pistol drawn. Ward barely raised his own weapon before a single muffled shot silenced him. On the table, his phone buzzed one last time. Unread. The West was real. You chose wrong. That night, Washington broadcast new rhetoric. Cartel assets eliminated. America remains secure. But beneath the polished words, every insider knew the truth. The strikes had killed men, but not the trade. The war was not won. It had only just begun. And somewhere in the Caribbean, another boat's engines roared to life, carving into the night.